All right, well, let's bring in the Shadow Minister for Industry and Innovation, Ed Husic. Now, Ed, thanks for your time as always. So what's your response to Josh Frydenberg's claim this morning that federal assistance will end once those vaccination targets are reached? Is that fair enough?
Good morning, Peter. Well, first, it's worth bearing in mind that this is a federal government that has spectacularly failed on most targets it's set for itself. So I'd be very careful about pinning financial support on targets by a federal government with that track record. And it's one thing for Josh to sound treasurer tough in saying that he'll remove financial support to communities on the basis of vaccine targets. But understand how that plays out, because targets are one thing, experience is another. And even in this week in Sydney, it's been revealed that wealthier parts of the north and the east of Sydney have vaccination rates that are 3 times higher than hotspots in Western Sydney, where we're calling for the government at both the federal and New South Wales level to step up vaccination, and they're not doing so, yet they're very quick to pull out financial support. And I'll just make this point in terms of financial support. They were slow to provide it in our part of Western Sydney. Then they made it hard for people to actually get any of the financial support. Then they provided it eventually, and now they're talking about getting rid of it while they haven't vaccinated people in vulnerable communities. So again, tough talk is one thing, but the reality of what it means for people in my area is a completely different one.
So when should it end then? When should the federal assistance end?
Again, like, they can talk about removing that when people do get vaccinated, but I want to see a bigger effort by federal and state governments to vaccinate people in our area. It's been a week, Peter. We spoke a week ago about the approach that Anthony Albanese made to Scott Morrison, calling on him to deploy the ADF to set up and run vaccination hubs to boost the vaccination effort in lockdown LGAs. And what he has done in the meantime is absolutely nothing. He hasn't even responded to that call. This is a race to vaccinate our people. It is a race to ensure that we protect their health, and it is a race to get out of this lockdown. And what we're seeing from both the federal and state governments is that we've got lead in their saddlebags at a time when we should be accelerating the rate of vaccination.
Sure, but when it comes to federal assistance, I mean, when should it end? I mean, you can't keep giving it out forever, I suppose, but while some states are threatening to keep lockdowns in place once 80% vaccination targets are reached, i.e. Mark McGowan, is it going to have to continue, and for how long?
Peter, the Treasurer is talking about a situation down the track when he is part of a government that is neglecting its responsibility to act swiftly right now in communities that I represent and that we've seen across Western Sydney, where they are not providing the level or the urgency to get people vaccinated as they should. So that is an issue in itself. And, for Josh to talk about what might happen down the track is all easy for him to do, but not for the communities I represent.
Right. So
and right now, we need
them
them to vaccinate. We need them to vaccinate, protect people's health, and then we can have a conversation about when all this ends.
Okay. Gladys Berejiklian, she's given up on COVID zero. She says she's living with it, and it's a decision that all other states are eventually going to have to make anyway. Does she have a point there?
Well, what does that mean on the ground is one thing. And when Gladys Berejiklian says we need to live with the virus, it basically sounds to me like we need to live with her failure to manage this lockdown, her failure to get our people vaccinated. Again, both her government and the federal government sent in the ADF largely to get involved in compliance efforts. We asked them to use the ADF in a way that we know they would be proud to do and that they would be very capable to do, and that is to vaccinate our communities. She has listed my area, Mount Druitt, as an area of concern repeatedly, and yet failed to open up a major vaccine hub. So when Gladys Berejiklian wants to go out and say that we should live with the virus, sorry, we are not prepared to live with her failure to act swiftly on behalf of the communities in our area. We want her to start acting on the calls that we are making as a community and to protect people. Because the reason I speak so strongly on this, Peter, is because I am genuinely concerned about the long-term impacts of COVID on people if they haven't been vaccinated, one. Two, it is always a struggle to get federal and Liberal governments to invest properly in healthcare in our area. And three, when you already have a Treasurer starting to talk about cutting financial support, you know when they go into budget repair that they will cut areas like healthcare, and that has an impact here. That has an impact here. So when the caravan moves on and they decide to go and cut, it's all basically glory for them, no responsibility, and people are left in the lurch in the western parts of the city.
You did mention one and some of your suburbs within your electorate. Numbers are continuing to rise there despite tougher restrictions that are in place now that Mick Fuller has got the stick out, so to speak. What continues to be the problem, though? Why do the numbers keep rising?
Because the vaccination rates, in large part, I would put it to you, are not matching demand. I have regularly people contacting the office wanting to get appointments. We also have reports of people having experienced difficulty in trying to get appointments through the booking system that the government has in place. What we need is a strong public health effort. As I said, get the ADF in to start up and run these vac centres. Call up retired GPs and nurses and medical students to help, and to ensure that the community is called up to volunteer to help run the centres as well, particularly on the administrative side of running these centres. Okay. That's a public health response. That's what you can do to boost vaccination. And instead of what we've seen out of the New South Wales government, which is to blame and shame Western Sydney in various parts or ramp up a police and ADF presence for compliance purposes, we can do something that's positive and meaningful, and they should do it.
Just a quick one before we go, Ed, on Afghanistan. The Prime Minister said yesterday, and has done for the past few days, that they'll be accepting 3,000 Afghan refugees. That's the floor, not the ceiling. Some people are calling for as many as 20,000. What's your view? How many should we be taking?
Well, first, I think we need to recognise that we had a federal government that had been urged for months to step in and in particular help those Afghans that had worked with us during our deployment of both military personnel and NGOs into Afghanistan over 20 years. And the government took their time to respond to that, and then suddenly said we can't, in the emerging events of this week, say, well, we just couldn't have foreseen, or that it has moved too quickly. Well, that's simply not the case. But having said that, I do welcome the fact that they have made those provisions within our intake. We haven't necessarily taken in, under our humanitarian program during the course of the pandemic, as many people as possible, and that's an understandable practical constraint. But certainly if we can do more, we should do more. I'm not going to go and pick numbers out of the air for the sake of this interview, but where we've got capacity to do so, and it appears we do within our existing program, we should.
Okay. Ed Husic, appreciate your time as always. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Pete.